Hey guys, welcome back to math class. Well, sort of. Let's go ahead and run through the solutions for worksheet 10-4, talking about scaling polygons. All right, so the first one says, which one describes the effect on the area of a triangle if the height is doubled? All right, so I've got area of a triangle. All right, so let's say we've got a triangle here. All right, and remember that is our height, perpendicular distance from the base to the opposite vertex. So for area of a triangle, it's 1/2 base times height, right? So it says, what's the effect on the area? How does it change the area if I double the height? So basically I'm gonna take the height and I'm gonna multiply it times 2. All right, so what's that gonna do to the final answer? Well, it's gonna double the final answer as well. All right, so for example, let's say the base is 5 and the height is 4. All right, so let's go ahead and put that in. So the original area would be 1/2 5 times 4, all right, which would equal 10. All right, but if I double the height and make the height 8, now I've got 1/2 times 5 times 8, and I've got an area of 20. So as you can see there, it just simply doubles the area. Okay, next up we have a trapezoid, and it's telling us to describe the effect on the trapezoid if we multiply all the dimensions by a factor of 1/4. All right, so here's the equation for a trapezoid. All right, I put in some dummy numbers just so we can work out the math and you can see how it works. All right, so we've got 1/2 times the height times the sum of the two bases, base 1 and base 2. All right. So let's go ahead and plug in these numbers for this trapezoid. Again, I just made those up, so let's see what we get for the area. So I've got 1/2 times the height, which in this case is 12, times the sum of the bases, which is 20 and 16. Okay, so let's go through and do that, and we'll grab our calculator real quick because we've got some bigger numbers. All right, so we've got 20 plus 16 is 36. We're going to multiply that times 12 and then times 1/2, so I get a total area of 216. All right, so that's what the normal area would be. All right, now we're going to scale all the numbers by a factor of 1/4. In other words, we're going to divide everything by 4. All right, so this base is now going to be equal to 4. This height is now going to be equal to 3, and then this base is now going to be equal to 5. All right, so there's my 3 new dimensions after I've scaled them all by a factor of 1/4. And let's figure out what the area is. So I've got 1/2 times the height, which is now 3, and the two bases added together, which is 5 and 4. All right, so we've got 9 times 3 is 27. All right, and then times 1/2, I've got 13.5. All right, so that's my total area for the scaled factor. All right, so how are these two related is what we want to figure it out. So 113.5 and 216, those are some kind of odd numbers. So we want to figure out what's happening to the area and what's happening to the perimeter as well. So let's talk about the area first. All right, the area. So we'll say, well, let's see if 216 and 13.5 divide evenly. So let's divide those together, and I get an even number of 16. So there's a scale factor of 16 here. Well, we scaled everything else by 1/4. All right, and so this is a scale factor of 1/16, because if I divide this by 16, then I get 13.5. So in other words, if I take this area and I multiply it by 1/16, then that's going to equal my new area. So it's got scaled by 1/16, which is 1/4 squared. Okay, so there's my first answer. The area is scaled by a factor of 1/16. Now let's take a look at the perimeter and how it's affected for this trapezoid. So again, just making these numbers up. So remember, perimeter, we're just adding all the sides. So the original perimeter is going to be 16 plus 20, which is 36, plus another 8 and 8, so 36 plus 16. So we end up with a total perimeter of 52. All right, so now we are going to scale all the dimensions that we're utilizing to find perimeter by a factor of 1/4. So I'm going to divide all these numbers by 1/4. So this becomes 4, 2, 2, and 5. So we add all those together. So the second perimeter, now that we've scaled it by a factor of 1/4, is going to be 4 plus 2 is 6, plus 5 is 11, and plus 2 is 13. All right, so what's the ratio between 52 and 13? Well, it's a 4-to-1 ratio, which means that the perimeter is also scaled by a factor of 1/4. All right, so the perimeter is scaled by a factor of 1/4, and the area is scaled by a factor of 1/4 squared, or 1/16. Okay, so this third problem gives us a triangle, and it gives us the dimensions of the two legs. Now it's a right triangle, so I only need the dimensions of the two legs to figure out the area, because one's the base and one's the height. All right, so area of a triangle, again, is 1/2 base times height. All right, so we're gonna plug those in. So that's 1/2 times 7.5 times 5. All right, so 7.5 times 0.5 times 5, and our total area is 18.75. All right, so it says what's the area of the new triangle if the length of the legs are both tripled. So we're just going to multiply these two by 3, and then we're going to find the area again. So if I multiply that times 3, all right, and then I multiply this times 3, all right, then this one I get 22.5, and this one I get 15. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and find the new area. So 1/2 times 22.5 times 15. So let's put that into our calculator. So 22.5 times 0.5 times 15. And we get an area of 168.75. And that is your final answer. All right, so the fourth one is talking about a circle, all right? It tells us that the circumference of that circle is equal to 100 even, all right? It says if the radius is decreased by a scale of 1/4, what's the new circumference? Well, we don't know what the radius is, and we could figure it out, obviously, solving for that, but it would be some crazy number. We don't care about that, though. We just want to know what's the effect on it if I scale the radius by 1/4. All right, so to find circumference, all right, is 2 pi r, okay? So if I take the radius and I divide it by 4, all right, whatever that might be, all right, then I'm basically going to multiply that radius times 1/4, all right, which is also going to divide the circumference by that same scale. So remember, circumference works the same as perimeter, okay? So if I multiply just one of those factors, which in this case there's only one dimension for a circle, and that's the radius. If I multiply that one dimension, a single dimension, by a scale factor, then the perimeter, or circumference in this case, is also changed by that same factor. All right. The only thing that would be different is if I was finding the area, then it would be the radius squared. So that means the scale factor would also be squared. But in this case, I just want circumference. So since I'm dividing that by 1/4, or multiplying it by 1/4, it will also multiply the circumference by 1/4. So in this particular case, my new circumference would simply be 25. All right, last problem. We've got a parallelogram, and it tells us it has an area of 48. All right, so it says if the height and the base are both cut in half. All right, remember area is just simply base times height. So all the dimensions, both dimensions are being cut in half. What's the new area? All right, so remember, since area is squared units, all right, if I change both of these, then it should scale the area by a factor of the scale factor squared. All right, so let's take a look at an example. All right, let's say, for example, that the height is, and again, I'm just making these numbers up, the height is 6 and the base is 8. All right, so base times height, that gives us an area of 48. All right, so if I want to cut both those in half, what kind of effects are going to have on the area? All right, so half of 6 is 3, and half of 8 is 4. So the new area is going to be equal to 12. All right, so once again, if my scale factor is 1/2, then for the area, then I'm going to multiply it by the scale factor squared, because remember, area is squared units. So if I square 1/2, then that's equal to 1/4. So does my scale factor equal 1/4? Well, yep, 48 times 1/4 is equal to 12. All right, but the answer they were looking for was 12. All right, make sure you go back and enter in all the correct answers and submit it if you haven't already. So make sure you still get full credit for the assignment.